Throughout the subsequent entries in the Silent Hill series, it has introduced a plethora of disturbing imagery, subtle yet detailed presentation in its horror, and sounds that give merit to its ambient atmosphere that build this looming dread. However, this wouldn't be complete without the many notable monsters that complement much of this horror design. From a young girl brought into a world of the sole purpose to being subjected and birthing a god through pain and suffering, to an absolute force of nature that lays upon judgment over a man who's guilt-ridden for his sins, and a youthful teenage girl who is forced into the horrific nightmare of experiencing the fears of womanhood and uncovering her past. This video will detail the lore, story, and symbolism of the many disturbing monsters in Silent Hill 1, Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 3, and finally Silent Hill 4. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the disturbing lore of Silent Hill monsters. Throughout the subsequent entries in the Silent Hill series, it has introduced a plethora. Before leaving the cafe, Harry hears a radio emitting a loud sound. Upon picking up the radio, the air screamer bursts into the window, forcing Harry to kill the monster. Bearing similarities to that of a flying reptile with pale, leathery skin, the air screamer is derived from its high-pitched screaming when spotting its prey and attacking its victim from the air. Due to its agility, the air screamer is usually seen mobile when airborne, rarely seen walking on land, and instead using its mobility to bite or slash at Harry. When it comes to combat, usually a firearm would suffice as it allows distance from having to get close to the monster, allowing for space to avoid damage. If a firearm is out of the question, then retreating is the next best option. Running in a zigzag motion and then dodging at the last second from the attack will help mitigate the chance of being damaged. The air screamer is one of the many manifestations derived from Alessa Gillespie's subconscious, more specifically, her inner fears, dark thoughts, and traumatic experiences, received in her upbringing by various factors throughout her childhood. An illustration from one of Alessa's favorite books titled The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle served as inspiration for the creation of the air screamer. The novel sees an expedition to a plateau based in the Amazons of South America, where prehistoric animals somehow survived. It's presumed that the pteranodon caught Alessa's attention and was used to distort and manifest dark imagery of that creature. After the encounter of the air screamer, Harry steps outside of the cafe to resume his search for Cheryl in the alleyway he was previously in. As Harry backtracks to the alleyway, he encounters another set of monsters guarding the gate before entering the alley, called the Groaners. The Groaner is a manifestation that is derived from Alessa's fear and strong dislike of dogs. This monster is a very large, hairless, and decayed-like dog that has brown skin and sharp, bloody teeth. The Groaner is one of the more common enemies in-game that are seen roaming the outside streets of Silent Hill. They are highly sensitive to sound and react immediately to the sounds of gunfire or running that is nearby. If alerted, the Groaner will attack Harry immediately by sprinting towards him to jump and bite viciously. When encountering the Groaner, it's best to use firearms from a safe distance, as when up close, they will circle around Harry and overwhelm him. Melee combat is an option. However, due to the agility of the Groaner, it could be difficult to land a melee hit. If combat isn't an option, then typically running away is the second best choice and dodging to the side as the Groaner will sprint and lunge to bite Harry. As Harry cautiously roams the dark-filled hallways and classrooms in the school, he will encounter a previously seen monster known as the Grey Child. These monsters are small in size, with childlike features and pale green skin that wield the knife as its weapon. Although they may appear not as threatening due to their small stature, they are not a force to be reckoned with, as they can easily latch and grab onto Harry, stunning him in the process as he forces himself free, which leaves him vulnerable and susceptible to damage. While vulnerable, Harry can easily be attacked by a nearby Grey Child that will deal damage with its knife as he is held hostage. The Grey Child walks throughout the halls of the first and second floors of the elementary school that are seen typically in large groups, which can be difficult to roam and navigate around them. When dealing with the Grey Child, it's best to either use a firearm while simultaneously walking backwards to avoid being grabbed by the Grey Child, or turning out the flashlight and walking slowly to avoid making loud noises to not alert the monster. The Grey Child is a manifestation of Alessa's classmates, seeing as these monsters appear heavily in Midwich Elementary, with a small, childlike appearance and behavior. Alessa's relationship with her classmates was strained, as they bullied her due to rumors of Alessa's mother, Dahlia Gillespie, a local and known figure who was the leader and priestess of the cults, the Order. The children spread rumors that Alessa was the child born from a mother who practiced witchcraft, associating these ritualistic practices with Alessa. resulting in Alessa being targeted as a victim by her classmates. The Great Child is a distorted, disturbed, and dark perspective of how Alessa views her classmates due to their constant bullying of her, which is made evident on her desk with scribblings that say, "Go home," or "Drop dead." In combat, when Harry is grabbed and vulnerable to the Great Child, they audibly laugh with other great children close by, slashing him with their knife. This is symbolic of Alessa's bullying, as her classmates would laugh as they physically assaulted her, with the knife representing their violent tendencies. A similar monster variant called the Larval Stalker is also seen roaming the hallways of Midwich Elementary School. However, these monsters are not what they seem, as they do little to no harm towards Harry, as they are unique for their non-aggressive and passive behavior. Rather, they are seen as translucent beings that take the form of a childlike body and behavior as they laugh or trip over themselves. The Larval Stalker is likely another manifestation similar to the Great Child in how they have a demeanor that results in them laughing, without the use of excessive violence at the expense of their victim. The laughing could reflect Alessa's verbal abuse from her fellow classmates who made fun of her by labeling her as a witch. The translucent quality of the Larval Stalker could be a projection of Alessa feeling invisible and unseen by others who witnessed the abuse, yet did nothing to stop it from happening. In the basement, Harry solves a turnstile valve puzzle to then enter an elevator to fight the first boss. Harry finds himself in a dark, industrial-like arena with a burning corpse in the middle set on fire. Shortly after, a massive lizard-like monster called the Splithead walks slowly towards Harry, commencing the first battle. The monster is large in size, with no noticeable facial features, as much of the face is obscured, seen only with a large, gaping split mouth. While it's slow in movement, it makes up for it in sheer size, as it can easily overpower Harry by headbutting at him, dealing lots of damage. In its second phase, it becomes much more aggressive, opening its large split mouth to bite and consume Harry. If successful, it will immediately kill Harry in one bite if Harry is unable to escape. Dealing damage to the Splithead is best with a firearm, likely the shotgun, it found previously in Otherworld Midwich Elementary School. The shotgun can deal lots of damage if you fire directly into the large, split mouth of the monster. The Splithead is implied from a previous memo Harry found in a fairy tale book called The Lizard's Story. The story tells the tale of a hunter armed with a bow and arrow, determined to find the lizard and kill the reptile. Alessa presumably read this fairy tale book from the school library, imagining the lizard as a monster. Further connecting this to Alessa is the corpse seen in fire in the industrial-like arena where the Splithead is fought, which serves as visual imagery of the burning she received from her mother after a ritual she was forced into went horribly wrong, resulting in her skin being charred and burned. Before reaching Alchemilla Hospital, Harry runs into the next monster, called the Romper. This monster is ape-like in its behavior, and also in its attacks towards Harry. It's easily sensitive to loud noises such as running or gunfire, resulting in the Romper skipping in a running-like motion to jump and topple Harry. Using either the handgun or shotgun would prove to be effective in dealing damage from a safe distance while backpedaling, as trying to melee the Romper could be difficult, since it's very agile in its movement. If all else fails, running and avoiding the enemy altogether is a safe option. However, the Romper could still run towards Harry and even pounce on him from behind to deal damage. The Romper is a manifestation that is derived from Alessa's fear of adults, likely due to her mother Dahlia and other cult members overpowering her and forcing her into their cult's practices and teachings that she grew to despise and hate over the years, creating not only resentment but also fear and negative thoughts towards adults due to their power and authority over her. While roaming through the industrial, rusted, decayed hallways, Harry encounters two monsters called the Puppet Nurse and Puppet Doctor. These monsters take the form of a human appearance that is possessed by a parasite on their back, which manipulates their movements by assuming control over their body. Both the Puppet Nurse and Puppet Doctor function relatively the same when it comes to their behavior. They both make loud, audible grunts or moans when roaming idly or when alerted by Harry's presence. The weapon of choice is a knife seen equipped in their hand, in which they will attack Harry by slashing at him or by having another Puppet Nurse or Puppet Doctor grapple him while the other attacks him simultaneously. The only minor difference in their gameplay is their strength and movement. Puppet Doctors are typically slower in their movement, yet stronger with their damage, while Puppet Nurses are faster in their movement, yet weaker in their attacks, dealing less damage. The Puppet Nurse and Puppet Doctor are symbolic of the corruption Alchemilla Hospital was subjected to, under Michael Kaufman's position of distributing the illegal drug, PTV, or forging medical records or autopsies. This could also be a projection of Alessa's hatred and distaste for doctors, as she was held captive in the basement of Alchemilla Hospital for 7 years against her will. When reaching room 204, Harry encounters a bloodsucker, a monster that comprises 3 leeches with octopus-like tentacles, hungry for sucking on blood. The Bloodsucker guards the plate of Hatter. To accomplish this, Harry must find a blood pack to distract the Bloodsucker from killing him, as if Harry gets too close, the Bloodsucker will capture him and kill him. The Bloodsucker is the only monster in game, with the exception of the Larval Stalker, that Harry cannot kill with physical force, such as melee or firearms. The Bloodsucker is said to be derived from less strong aversion to leeches or snakes, similar to her dislike of specific insects. While exploring the mall, Harry accidentally walks on a weak platform that collapses, seeing him fall into an arena with the second boss, the Twin Feeler. The monster is a giant moth larva that is derived from Les's fascination with collecting insects. The Twin Feeler uses the ground to travel underneath Harry to use as an advantage to surprise him whenever it protrudes from the ground to deal damage by spitting acid. Because the Twin Feeler is always moving, it's difficult to use melee combat as much of Harry's attacks will miss due to the hitbox. It's best to use the hunting rifle, which is found close by in the same arena, and use the spare rifle ammo to deal heavy damage against the Twin Feeler. Moving around the arena and not staying in one place will be beneficial for survival and avoid being snuck up on and getting attacked. After a harsh, grueling battle, Harry defeats the Twin Feeler. However, this defeat is short-lived as the Twin Feeler retreats. With an exit provided to leave the Silent Hill town center, Harry travels to the otherworld Central Silent Hill to navigate the linear, nightmarish hellscape to a safer location. In his efforts, Harry encounters a variant of the Air Screamer called the Night Flutter. Much like the Air Screamer, the creature resembles a pteranodon-like monster, with differences that are seen in its appearance when it comes to its head being replaced with a solid mass of worms, and its body appearing more humanoid. Because it is a variant of the Air Screamer, this monster differs in its airspeed and strength, as it is much more ruthless and vicious in nature. The Night Flutter appears more hostile and aggressive towards Harry when pursuing him in flight. If alerted by his presence, the Night Flutter will fly towards his location, diving towards him to slash him. Melee combat is a futile option as it is always in the air and never comes down to ground level. Weapons such as the shotgun, or if necessary for stronger firepower, the hunting rifle, will work just as fine to kill the monster. The Night Flutter is symbolic of Les's disgust for worms. This is emphasized in Night Flutter's appearance as it has a mass of worms conjoined into forming a head on the creature that comes off as vile and putrid, aligning with Les's perception of insects. The Night Flutter could also be symbolic of Harry's sanity deteriorating, as worms are known to naturally decompose, a metaphor for his thoughts, fears, and worries literally and figuratively devouring him and eating his sanity away. Close by in Central Silent Hill, Harry encounters a variant of the Groaner called Wormhead. Similar to its counterpart, the Wormhead has dog-like features in its appearance, with much more weight compared to the skinny, withered appearance of the Groaner. The head shape amasses worms, conjoined to manipulate that of a worm-like head. Because of the influence of the Otherworld, the monster becomes much more agile in its momentum and stronger in its strength, functioning similarly to the Groaner. The Wormhead will be susceptible to any loud audible sounds, such as Harry running close by or gunshots being fired, resulting in the Wormhead running towards Harry's location to attack him. Because they're sensitive to sound, it's best to avoid the Wormhead altogether by retreating. However, if necessary, they can be easily disposed of with a shotgun or hunting rifle as long as you're in a safe location. Because of their appearance, manifesting that of a dog in conjunction with worms, it's symbolic of Les's hatred and dislike towards dogs and worms. With their combined features, it could be speculated that it's the Otherworld's corruption of Les's fears manifesting into a much more powerful force, a metaphor for one's loss of sanity and disillusionment to the horrors overpowering the human psyche. As Harry leaves Alchemilla Hospital, he first has to engage in a battle with the third boss, called the Floatstinger, an evolution of the moth larva previously seen as the Twin Feeler, now in a mature form that is exaggerated in its size. Much of the Floatstinger gameplay functions with aerial attacks, staying afloat in the air as an advantage over Harry on the surface level. The monster spits acid projectiles from its mouth and uses its stinger to sting Harry. Gunplay is recommended in this boss fight as melee combat is not as effective, especially with short-range melee weapons such as the knife. As always, gun combat is best for the situation as it will give Harry distance while backpedaling when firing a shotgun or a hunting rifle. However, momentum is key here as the arena is very claustrophobic and doesn't have lots of ankle room to breathe. The Floatstinger is manifested from Melissa's interest in moths. Moths in symbolism often represent transformation, frequently associated with a cycle of life and death. An interpretation of the moth can be derived from Melissa's loss of innocence, a child born into the darkness of the physical and verbal abuse she suffered, yet subjected to being hailed and worshipped as the Mother of God, prophesied to create a world of lights. One could say the transformation of the moth appears harmless and innocent, but as the nightmares and trauma from Alessa's abuse and torture manifested, this innocence becomes corrupted and projects physical forms of these nightmares into reality. After defeating the Flowstinger, Harry is transported back to the Fog World in central Silent Hill. Harry then backtracks to Old Silent Hill towards the sewers location on Midwich Street to brute force his way into a locked gate and go down a ladder into the sewers. Once Harry arrives in the sewers, Harry encounters the Creepers. The Creepers don't pose much of a threat as they're easily avoidable and don't deal significant damage. Because they are small in size, it may prove to be difficult to attack them with a melee weapon, but easier to fire at with a firearm. Alternatively, Harry can choose to have his light off and avoid them altogether, as they can prove to be tedious rather than difficult due to the reaction to light, which causes them to run away, ensuing a chase to kill them. The Creepers are manifested from Alessa's disgust over cockroaches. While navigating through the liminal underground labyrinth of the sewers, Harry finds the sewer exit key. Shortly after, he encounters the monster called Hang Scratcher. This monster bears a resemblance to that of a green reptile, possibly a frog. These monsters have elongated, thin limbs and sharp claws that allow them to traverse around the walls or hang from the ceiling as an advantage when preying on their victim. Furthermore, they appear in either a group of 2 or 3 to surround their prey and make it difficult to escape, overwhelming their victim. Due to their radio not working underground, this can make it difficult to be alerted to the presence of the Hang Scratcher, surprising their victim in panic. The monster is also very persistent in the pursuit of its prey, as it will consistently follow Harry when alerted of its presence and will attack until he is dead. It's best to deal with the Hang Scratcher with a strong firearm such as the shotgun or rifle. The hammer makes a great melee weapon if needed to cover crowd control. The Hang Scratcher is manifested from Alessa's dislike for insects, albeit with the exception for moths. She shows disdain and disgust for other insects that appear vile or putrid in its appearance. The Hang Scratcher, appearing in its human-like body, could possibly reinforce her fear of humans. After escaping the sewers, Harry finds himself in the resort area. Upon exploring, Harry's met with the Mumbler, a variant of the Great Child. Interestingly, the Mumbler serves to replace the Great Child in the PAL and Japan versions of Silent Hill 1. As the Great Child underwent many revisions as it was rejected by the PEGI and SETO censorships due to the Great Child resembling that of a child, and the fact that he had to kill them in an act of self-defense. As a compromise, Team Silent made the Mumbler for the PAL and Japan versions. The Mumbler appears with reddish-brown skin, short in size, and has long, razor-sharp claws. Its primary attack is using its claws to slash at Harry and to grab onto him so he becomes vulnerable to other surrounding Mumblers' attacks. Because they function similarly to the Great Child, using a firearm while simultaneously backpedaling or turning off the flashlight to avoid them proves to be the viable option. The Mumbler is likely a manifestation derived from the dark fairy tales that Alessa read in her time at Midwich Elementary School. Harry finally confronts Dahlia, only to be met with Sybil putting her handgun at her, threatening to open fire if she doesn't comply. Sybil fires her gun, but to no avail as Dahlia and Alessa are protected due to Alessa's fetus casting protection over the surrogate mother, resulting in Sybil being thrown back by Alessa's psychokinesis. Losing patience, Harry demands an answer as to what is going on and where Cheryl is. Dahlia tells Harry that Cheryl returned to Alessa, making her soul complete as she returned to her former self. Dahlia reveals to Harry that 7 years ago, Alessa was kept alive, suffering from her wounds, in turn, nurturing the fetus from her pain. This was an attempt to expedite the process. Her suffering subconsciously called to Cheryl to return to Alessa, no longer delaying the ritual and instead finishing what she started many years ago. With Alessa's withered body in the wheelchair and her astral projection nearby, this fuses both the god and herself to form the incubator, an idealized interpretation derived from Alessa's mental image of a beautiful, angelic woman resembling that of God, symbolizing Alessa's innocence and purity, dressed in white robes with glowing, bright lights, and appearing as a holy, benevolent deity in nature. Soon after, Dahlia is immediately shot by Kaufman, enraged that Dahlia used and betrayed him. In retaliation, Kaufman reveals a vial of Aglaophatus, with the intention of dispelling the demonic entity residing inside the incubator. As Kaufman throws the Aglaophatus towards the incubator, this exorcises the god, revealing the incubus, a demonic-like entity that possesses the power of flight and lightning. In demonstrating this power, it ultimately kills Dahlia with its lightning strike. Realizing the god has been revealed in its true form, Harry commences in a final battle with the incubus. Because the god is imperfect, its appearance shows a demon-like creature that is based on the demon Baphomet, an ambiguously gendered entity that possesses qualities of both male and female features, symbolizing the equilibrium of opposites. The image is derived from the French occult writer Eliphas Lévy. According to Levy, his intention was to symbolize Baphomet with the concept of balance, representing the goal of perfect social order. Because of its occult and satanic-like imagery, Baphomet is shunned and frowned upon by Catholic and Christian cultures. The god has a head of a goat, missing eyes, with two sharp, demon-like horns protruding out of its head, the feet with hooves, its body resembling that of a malnourished human, with its spine visible and its abdomen rotted away, feathered wings, and its breasts symbolizing the binary features. According to Masahiro Ito, the unintelligible symbols inscribed on both wings are derived from Greek, meaning something. The rest of the words on the body of the incubus have not all been identified, resulting in the words remaining unexplained. The incubus is a collective manifestation derived from the cult itself, worshipping the idolized god in conjunction with the mental image of Alessa's idea of God. The Silent Hill Chronicle, Book of Lost Memories, states that the form of God, born to the earth, changes depending on those who summon it. For example, the town of Silent Hill holds the power to materialize delusions and innermost thoughts from one's subconscious. God is the result of someone's delusions, just like the other creatures. Alessa worshipped and prayed for a god to be seen as holy and pure, which is derived from the incubator. However, once a Glaphotis is used on the incubator, it exercises the god to be seen in its true form, as an incomplete demonic entity manifested from the order's psyche. The incubus is airborne in its boss fight, remaining stationary as it never once moves from its position during flight. Its primary attack is red lightning strikes that are violently expelled upon from the sky, dealing massive damage, which can kill Harry instantly on harder difficulties. This attack will warrant the use of health items if susceptible to taking damage and failure to evade attacks. The only reliable option in avoiding these attacks is running in a circle once the lightning strikes appear. However, this method of choice is difficult to perform as it's not always consistent. Once the sequence ends, Harry should use the hunting rifle as it has the best damage output for this boss fight. After a long, grueling battle, Harry finally defeats the incubus, successfully killing the god as it dissipates and vanishes, reverting back to its previous form as the incubator. As the otherworld starts to collapse, a fading apparition of Alessa gives Harry a newly born baby, a reincarnation of both Alessa's and Cheryl's souls combined into one, warranting a new start for herself in hopes of a normal and healthy life that isn't riddled with pain and suffering. While hesitant, Harry accepts her offering. Shortly after, Alessa's apparition opens a portal to the real world, allowing Harry and Sybil to escape with the baby, leaving this nightmare finally behind. In her final moments, Alessa lies down defeated in the collapsing otherworld, with fire consuming her, ending her nightmares, and finally, letting her rest in peace. Harry and Sybil escape through the portal to the real world, with Harry holding the baby in his hands tightly, seen running through the foggy streets of Silent Hill. The lying figure is a physical manifestation derived from James's subconscious, a result of the memories James spent during his time hospitalizing a sick and terminally ill Mary. The term lying figure comes from a figure, Mary, lying on their deathbed, bedridden and rotting away. The appearance of the monster takes the form of a body bag, referring to a corpse that is disposed of when deceased. The movements of the lying figure represent a patient who is desperately squirming to be freed, as it suffers in painful agony. An allegory of Mary's physical torment as she lies bedridden in the hospital bed, slowly withering away. According to Masahiro Ito, the design and inspiration of the lying figure were inspired by BDSM fashion, given the early designs with high-heeled boots and a straight jacket, revealing some skin. The final design was influenced by the painter Francis Bacon, particularly the painting called Study from the Human Body, Man Turning on the Light. Much like the rest of the monsters, Masahiro Ito created them to have a form of human-like qualities, such as their movement, to create an uncanny valley effect. For the lying figure, he was inspired by his colleague who one day was wearing a jacket with a hoodie over his head, walking in a cold way while listening to his Walkman. James continues through the back alley where he encounters the creepers. Popular to the contrary belief, the creepers aren't derived from James's subconscious, whereas the other monsters roaming Silent Hill are instead manifestations that are derived from his guilt, trauma, or desires. The creepers are rather manifestations that are from the collective unconscious minds of people who resided in Silent Hill. This is potentially due to the residue effect from the events of the previous entry, Silent Hill, which derived from Alessa Gillespie, who had a strong dislike for insects. The literal reason as to why the creepers make an appearance in James's story is due to Masahiro Ito, series monster designer, wanting to pay homage to the first entry, hence portraying the creeper as a residue effect, bordering into James's Silent Hill. The mannequins are a manifestation of James's suppressed urges and inclinations, derived from his desire for lust he felt for Mary, presumably due to the lack of sexual activity the relationship once had. However, due to Mary's illness, leaving her bedridden, this left James felt guilty for desiring such inclinations from his sexuality, which manifested into physical form as the mannequin. Sexuality encompasses much of the mannequin's design in the context of James's memories during his stay at the hospital with Mary, which is why it contrasts with a medical mannequin dummy. The monster design features an emphasis on the legs, particularly referring to the leg braces, or more specifically, orthoses. During Mary's illness, she needed to wear leg braces to help her with her mobility as she presumably lost function in both of her legs. Coincidentally, the design of the mannequin bears a resemblance to the mannequin dolls by Polish-German artist Hans Bellmer, particularly his surrealist imagery of life-size female dolls. However, Masahiro Ito retracts from these claims, and instead reveals that the inspiration for the mannequins came from traditional Japanese folklore, specifically the Ashinaga Tanaga, a pair of yokai in Japanese folklore. The term Ashinaga Jin refers to the yokai that has extremely long legs, while the other yokai, Tanaga Jin, has extremely long arms, because the mannequins are harassed and executed by Pyramid Head later on in Woodset Apartments. It could come off as a disturbingly sensitive scene with its presentation, as it appears as if Pyramid Head is sexually harassing the mannequins due to the erotic behavior. However, this isn't the case, as Pyramid Head's actions are to punish and execute, as he is a manifestation derived from James's desire to be punished and forced to remember his past actions. As James roams the second floor of the hospital, he cautiously walks through the darkness of the linear hallways and rooms, only to be introduced to a new monster that is dressed in a nurse's uniform with a humanoid-like appearance, with a notable quality to its unique bubble head. The bubble-like head is meant to be symbolic of Mary's swollen head, which is seen as deceased and grotesque, with her cancer-like tumors of sores that plagued her facial appearance. The violent shaking and twitching of the bubblehead nurses symbolizes screaming or shrieking, as if someone is using a bag to suffocate them. Furthering this allegory is a red square on their mouths, vocalizing Mary's insanity as her terminal illness worsened. The suffocation motif also connects to Mary screaming as James suffocated her with a pillow, as she screamed in confusion and horror as she watched James kill her. The red squares also reaffirms the 9 delusions James encounters throughout his story. The baby-like face alludes to the idea that James and Mary wanted to have a baby of their own, which is solidified with Mary admitting in her letter to Laura that she would have adopted Laura if she weren't hospitalized and was healthy. James then meets the next monster, called the Flesh Lips. The monster is a creature bound by a lattice, a bed-like frame that contains a large, sack-like body bag with legs sticking out from the bottom, as well as a visible mouth that is seen at the bottom of the sack. The mouth is a common, regular motif seen throughout the game, which is represented as Mary's verbal abuse when she would project her anger and frustration towards James. Interestingly, once James notices the mouth on the monster, he then finds that other monsters have mouths, such as the Mandarin. The Flesh Lip was inspired by Osamu Noguchi's deaf lynched figure and the 1976 photograph Man with No Legs by Joel Peter Witkin. The mouth is inspired by the painting Second Version of Triptych 1944 by Francis Bacon. While navigating Otherworld South Vale, James eventually finds himself in a dark tunnel exploring an underpass, where he's then introduced to the next monster called the Mandarin. The monster is usually seen hanging underneath a mesh grating, using its strong, suction cup-like forearms to move around underneath the platform to attack James. They typically use their tongue-like tendril to inflict damage by stabbing James when caught in their sights. The Mandarin is meant to be symbolic of James's feelings, these feelings making him feel trapped and suffocated from Mary's everlasting verbal abuse enforced onto him, as he listened to her violently and angrily project those feelings of pain and sorrow onto him. Much like the Flesh Lips, the Mandarin also have a noticeable mouth that is seen taking form on their face. The mouth symbolizes the pain and insanity vocalized by Mary, but taking a different context when applied to James, symbolizing his desire to escape from Mary as he feels trapped and unable to escape this prison of his own creation. The Mandarin is inspired by the Japanese Mandarin, a bureaucrat appointed as a general in Imperial China. Masahiro Ito thought that the outfit, specifically their arms, contributed to much of the Mandarin's design. James then finds himself in a long hallway that seemingly feels endless, with how liminal and foreboding the pathway seems to be. Eventually, James finds a hallway that leads to a door with various newspapers scattered everywhere. One newspaper specifically mentions a man named Thomas Orozco, found murdered on his chair with his neck receiving multiple stab wounds and his left side of the stomach slit open. This newspaper report refers to Angela and her undergoing a mental breakdown after years of torment and abuse, leading her to finally kill her father. Inside the apartment, James finds Angela in her room, sitting on the floor, crying. Angela tells James that he's coming and to tell him that she'll be good, referring to the next monster as Abstract Daddy. Moments later, the Abstract Daddy forces itself onto James and pushes him down, leaving James to quickly rebalance his position and prepare to battle. The monster is a manifestation of Angela's trauma and abuse inflicted by her father and brother. The monster has a vague but noticeable outline of an intimate posture of two figures wrapped in flesh, depicting one on top of the other on a bed frame. The figure lying on the bottom is represented as Angela, as there is a visual of a mouth that screams in agony, with the other figure on top symbolizing her father. It's important to note that while it's implied through subtle visual imagery and slight context clues through Angela's behavior and mannerisms, James has no idea or clue that she's a victim of trauma and abuse. James's interpretation of the monster is derived from the subconscious thoughts and memories he had when visiting Mary and seeing her sick and bedridden. Angela's manifestation of her father is completely different from what James sees and is left ambiguous, as Masahiro Ito admits that the interpretation of Angela's manifestation of the Abstract Daddy is far more disturbing, left up to interpretation from the player. Angela's trauma can be further speculated as James progresses through the boss fight, as much of the time spent in this area is in abstract, visual imagery constructing Angela's childhood home. For example, there's a closet with a makeshift room with a carved out hole to squeeze through, with a bed and teddy bear. This alludes to Angela hiding from her father and brother from the physical and sexual abuse as a safe space for her when she had nowhere else to go. Furthering this abstract, visual imagery of her abuse and trauma are the TVs James is meant to destroy, which plays distorted and inaudible audio of Thomas Orozco emotionally and verbally lashing out against Angela. James destroying the TV is meant to be a metaphor for when Thomas destroys the TV when he's drunk and angry. As he roams through the dark, linear hallways, James comes to find a dark, ominous figure behind a barred fence as he stares menacingly at James. This monster is known as Red Pyramid Thing, or more commonly associated as Pyramid Head. Masahiro Ito envisioned Pyramid Head as a monster who would always serve a purpose and a meaningful role in the overarching narrative of Silent Hill 2. Serving as a parallel to James Sunderland as one of James's physical manifestations, he is brought to life through James's subconscious, warranting to be punished for the crimes and sins he committed against his wife, Mary. Because of this desire, Pyramid Head would be James's executioner of judgment. In Silent Hill Historical Society, the painting, Misty Day, Remains of Judgment, serves as the inspiration for James subconsciously awakening Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head is derived from the town's executioners from its early history, specifically the cult's Valtiel sector. The monster takes a similar appearance to the executioners of the town's cults, with a red rusted, pyramid-shaped helmet over his head, donning a butcher's wardrobe, black leather boots, and white executioner's gloves. Furthermore, the town's executioners would hang anyone deemed with sin, resulting in their punishment being death. Misty Day, Remains of Judgment, is a warped painting of the town's executioners, manifesting the monster Pyramid Head. Although Pyramid Head appears as an antagonistic role, given his hostile and brutal nature directed towards James, in reality, he exists to humanize James and to help him realize that he is guilty, often attacking other monsters to fulfill his role. The scene where James hides in the closet from Pyramid Head abusing the mannequins represents the conflict in his mind. His fear of facing his inner demons manifested itself as Pyramid Head attacking other monsters to remove the vision from his psyche. As Takayoshi Sato explains, psychological horror has to shake a human's heart deeply. Shaking people's hearts deeply means uncovering people's core emotion and their core motivations for life. Everybody is thinking and concerned about sex and death. Everything. If we want to scare, shake, or touch the users or spectators, then we have to think deeply about sex and death. To make it like a death scene, somebody died or monsters died. We try to mix erotic essence. This is kind of a visual and a core concept. After encountering Pyramid Head, elsewhere in Silent Hill Historical Society is the painting Misty Day, Remains of the Judgment, a painting that depicts Pyramid Head standing ominously with his great spear, with hanging corpses and metal cage-like structures. This painting reflects the town's executioners from the early history of Silent Hill. These executioners are depicted in the painting Crimson and White Banquet for the Gods, wearing white robes and red hoods that were part of the cult, the Order, specifically the Valtiel sector. The Valtiel sector served under the belief that Valtiel was the saint who corresponded to that of an angel who served under God. It was believed that Valtiel was connected and derived from the figure in Jewish mysticism known as Metatron, often described as the highest of angels, with various roles including celestial scribe and mediator between God and humanity, serving as the guide and speaker for God to lead humanity to salvation in its presence. Likewise, Pyramid Head bears a resemblance that loosely adopts the presence of the Valtiel sector, such as his pyramid head-shaped helmet, butcher's apron, and white gloves. Before her illness and during their vacation trip to Silent Hill, James and Mary visited the Silent Hill Historical Society. One of the paintings that fascinated James was Misty Day, Remains of the Judgment, depicting the town's executioners from its early history, serving as an inspiration to have James subconsciously derive this manifestation meant to act as the executioner of judgment, subjecting himself to undergo this guilt and desire for punishment. James needs Pyramid Head as a brutal yet harsh reminder of his sins and crimes committed towards Mary, to make him accept and acknowledge the truth of his actions. Pyramid Head, while appearing as an antagonistic threat and force of nature, is meant to symbolize James's internal struggle and conflict with reconciling with his past actions, but simultaneously humanizes him by learning to accept his repressed trauma and letting go by moving on from his pain and suffering. As James reaches the boardwalk at the end of the pier, he finds a blonde-haired woman wearing a red leather vest, a black tight dress, and leather boots. The girl introduces herself as Maria. Hearing this, James gets whiplash and confusion from her appearance, as it eerily resembles his late wife, Mary. At first glance, Maria deems a resemblance to Mary almost as if she could be her identical twin. While the odds of this may come off as coincidental, this is by no means an accident. As James vocalized earlier, he mentions that Maria looks just like Mary, which is due in part to Maria being a manifestation that is derived from James's subconscious. Maria takes the physical appearance of a healthy, youthful, and extroverted version of Mary, which is a juxtaposition from the sick, disease-ridden Mary that was introverted, closed off, and bitter towards James. Maria was literally and figuratively born from a wish, as her sub-scenario implies, with James subconsciously desiring a healthy and lively Mary who doesn't suffer from her ill-fated disease, but also because James misses and longs for his wife upon her death, as at this point in time, he cannot let her go after mercifully murdering her. James's desire is also seen as an illusion, as Silent Hill possesses the power to project and manifest one's mental figments of imagination into reality. Maria is seen as one of the 9 delusions James sees throughout his story, who admittedly sees himself not caring if she's real or not. The morality of Maria's existence comes into question, as Maria herself, while born from James's subconscious as one of his delusions, bears the sentience when it comes to exacting control over her emotions and having existential thoughts over her purpose. When born into reality, in her sub-scenario, born from a wish, Maria is born in the back room of Heaven's Night, not knowing who she is or her purpose. She contemplates suicide as she points a revolver at the mirror. However, due to her desperation to wanting to find someone alive in the town filled with monsters, she decides to try and find anyone who is still in the town. This leads her to Baldwin Mansion, where she meets the ghostly apparition of a man named Ernest Baldwin. Their conversations are shared behind locked doors, as Ernest is apprehensive about Maria seeing him, as he isn't physically present, but rather spiritually. Ernest arranges an agreement with Maria that if she gets him the white liquid, white chrism, for him to conduct a ritual in bringing back his deceased daughter, Amy, he'll point her in the direction where she'll find the purpose she's looking for. Maria then heads to Blue Creek Apartments to acquire the white chrism and returns to Ernest to give him the material he needs. As promised, Ernest reveals and implies a bad man named James, whom he states as the man who's looking for you that isn't you, implying that while James manifested these thoughts and desires for Mary, believing that a delusion, Maria, would fill in that void of loneliness he feels without his wife, isn't inherently what he wants deep down, and instead just wants Mary back again. Maria acknowledges this information regarding James and makes it her desire to search for him in desperation, and hoping to see if he accepts her for who she is, not Mary. With this context, it can be alluded that Maria's purpose is to win over James, which expresses this sexually flirtatious personality that is cheerful and energetic amongst their interactions with each other. However, there's also a different side of Maria that encompasses a dark and moody personality, which can see her lash out against James whenever he mentions Mary. Maria's bitterness and rudeness towards James are meant to be an allusion to Mary's personality when she was suffering with her illness, as she too was seen as emotionally manipulative and abusive as she projected her pain onto him. These subtle behavior shifts and differences in Maria's personality are meant to be ironic as she encompasses the demeanor of Mary, which illustrates James's inability to know what he truly wants. Maria is often associated with a moth, as moths are meant to be a personification of transformation of life, death, and reincarnation, which is meant to convey the rebirth of Mary through Maria. In the next room over, James opens the door to find Maria hanging upside down in a metal cage frame, with 2 pyramid heads standing next to her, side by side. As James pleads to them not to kill her and to leave them alone, they pierce the great spear into her chest, which has James yell and fall to his knees in defeat. In this moment of clarity, James realizes what Pyramid Head is, and comes to accept that Pyramid Head is the part of him that seeks punishment for his guilt in killing Mary. As James learns and remembers what he's done, he also gains perspective and acceptance, learning to accept that the deepest and darkest parts derived from his subconscious may be a part of him, but doesn't necessarily mean it defines him. As James commences in battle with the twin Pyramid Heads, they come to accept defeat, walking towards James and simultaneously piercing the great spears into their heads. James acquires the scarlet egg and the rusted color egg and inserts them into the twin doors. James then walks down a long, dark, ominous hallway with a voice that sounds like Mary. In this memory, Mary acts bitter and cold towards James as she sees him bringing her flowers, while she lies in bed ill. Mary, clouded by her judgment, denies his advances to emotionally support her and instead lashes out at him. As James is about to leave Mary, she has a second thought as he doesn't want him to go, pleading to him to stay with her and tell her that she'll be okay. As James descends the stairwell to the top floor, he finally finds Mary, awaiting him as she looks out into the white fog. James, stunned and shocked to see Mary waiting for him, shouts her name as she turns around quickly, running to hug each other. As they embrace, James laments how much he missed her, with Mary reciprocating these feelings. As they hold each other, Mary makes a comment about how they can finally be together forever. This comment makes James suddenly realize that this Mary isn't her, but instead, Maria. James backs away and apologizes, saying how much he is sorry for the trouble he has put her through, but reaffirms to her that this nightmare has to end, and it's time to let go. Maria, angered by his comment, states that she can't let him go, but also the part of her that reconciled with the pain and anguish Mary has been through. Acknowledging that Maria and Mary are one and the same, Maria then shifts into the manifestation that reveals her true form, which embodies the conflicting thoughts that James had towards Mary in her final days before she died, but also the complex emotions Mary had of her predicament as she saw her life stolen and taken away from her. The metal cage frame is meant to represent the confinement Mary had when she spent her long-term illness trapped to a bed. Her appearance reflects the sick, ill, and deceased body that imitates that of a corpse, encompassing the themes of rot, desolation, and ruin, which we've seen throughout the story. One of Maria's attacks is a large, tendril-like tentacle that strangles James, reflecting the asphyxiation Mary received when James was suffocating her as she struggled to breathe. After a long, heartfelt, and emotional battle, James sees Maria fall to the ground in pain, repeating James's name, beckoning him to come to her aid. James, understanding what he must do, finally ends Maria's pain. James finds himself in a room with a bedridden Mary, lying in bed as she struggles to breathe and is fatigued from her illness. James tells Mary he's sorry for killing her when he didn't have the right to. Mary counters this with her wanting the pain to end. Even though James acknowledges this sentiment, he states that the reason he killed her was that he hated her. Mary says, if that's true, then why do you look so sad? Mary then gives James a letter that is meant for him to read, the one he was trying to find ever since Laura mentioned it to him. As he holds the letter, he watches Mary pass away once again, but this time, peacefully. Heather finds herself in an alleyway outside the mall, needing to re-enter. Upon doing so, Heather finds the mall empty, although finds one mall store open called Boutique Marquette. Once entering, much to her surprise, she finds a handgun lying on the ground. Curious, Heather picks up the weapon and hears an odd sound in the corner of the room. She sees the disturbing scene of an otherworldly monster feasting on the corpse of a young brunette woman. Shocked, Heather steps back away slowly, utterly terrified, as the monster slowly walks to her. Heather, commanding the monster to stay back and refusing to comply, forces her to use the handgun and proceed to fire bullets at the monster, killing it as it falls to the ground. A tall, looming, and menacing creature that stands confident in its size. The monster called it closer encompasses a tall stature, with its head embodying a mouth, as well as the creature's arms. When attacking, they throw out their arms rather sluggishly, with a sharp, tendril-like blade protruding out as it omits this action. Upon first glance, the closer looks reminiscent of the Mandarin, a previous monster that appeared in Silent Hill 2. Both monsters share a similar appearance in their size, body, and arm structure. This is no coincidence, as series monster designer Masahiro Ito comments that the appearance being similar to that of the Mandarin when compared to the closer is meant to serve a connection between Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3. Masahiro Ito expresses the lack of representation of the closer in the original Silent Hill 2, as it was mostly vague and infrequent in its appearance, deemed as ignored. With this fondness he has for the monster, he addresses the closer in Mandarin are not necessarily the same monster for James or Heather respectively, rather, not dependent on the person, but the manifestation of the town's power that arises from the collective thought of those who previously were sent to Silent Hill. Rather, not dependent on the person solely, but the manifestation of the town's power that arises from the collective thought of those who were sent to Silent Hill previously, which has an influence on the monster's design. The name, Closer, comes from the ability to obstruct a path of its massive proportions of arms. Upon stepping into the elevator, Heather then sees the transition to the Otherworld Central Square shopping center, finding the once lively and robust atmosphere of the mall in this now rusted and industrial-like quality. Upon leaving the elevator, Heather is met with a monster called the Double Head. These canine-like monsters usually appear in groups of 2 or 4, searching the area to attack their prey. They possess a notable feature that sees a vertical split with their jawline where their tongues hang lazily, and the inside of the head shows flesh. Bandages cover the body of the dog as it's meant to have 2 separate dogs conjoined together, serving as visual imagery of the bandages that Alessa Gillespie had to wear from her severe burns and scars from being burned alive. The idea of 2 dogs splitting into 2 and having each respective body conjoined together could be a metaphor for Alessa and Cheryl Mason's soul split in half and later rejoined as one. Masahiro Ito claims that the purpose of putting the double head at the beginning of the story, specifically Central Square Shopping Center, was to convey the hopelessness and vulnerability of Heather entering a hellish world. Much of the inspiration for the double head's design was based on the Greek mythology creature named Cerberus, a monstrous, multi-headed dog that is appointed as the watchdog at the entrance of the underworld. The connection between Silent Hill and Hell, while not meant to be taken literally, is rather a metaphor and allusion to the idea of Silent Hill, figuratively speaking, manifesting our fears, traumas, and eternal thoughts into physical form, which is derived from the other world to project these nightmarish delusions into reality. The double head can serve as an allusion to Cerberus as it guards the other world, which, given the interpretation, can be seen as a form of hell. In the Otherworld Central Square Shopping Center, after killing or evading doubleheads and closers, on this floor, she then meets a monster called the Numb Body. A veiny, pale-like monster, the Numb Body features relatively minor details to its design, as its notable quality is the body itself. Using its legs for traversal, much of the Numb Body's attacks are heavily dependent on momentum, such as walking towards or hopping side by side when encountering Heather or evading her attacks. Its only attack is ramming against Heather with its head-like mouth. Usually, Numb Bodies are seen either alone or in large groups with small and large variants. Numb Body is derived from the slow and clumsy-like movements and the pale, veiny-like skin of its body. According to Masahiro Ito, he didn't design the monster of the Numb Body, instead only designed Valtiel, Closer, Nurse, the Slurper, and God. Because of this, some of the monsters in Silent Hill 3 don't have fleshed out symbolism in mind, with no special meaning, and instead, vague and abstract interpretations that are up for speculation as to what they could mean. Heather finds herself atop the 3rd floor of the Otherworld Central Square Shopping Center. At the edge of a platform is a ladder that ascends further into the deep void of the mall, leaving Heather no other choice but to scale down the ladder. At the bottom, Heather finds a large arena with 6 gaping holes in the wall. Suddenly, Heather finds a monster that protrudes out of the rubble, which is monstrous in size. This monster, known as the Split Worm, is massive in its worm-like size with a large, lavender-colored outer layer that splits wide open, revealing a head with massive jaws and the resemblance of human-like teeth. The Split Worm uses its body to contract and move with its momentum, much like a worm, to submerge through holes and appear in others nearby to surprise Heather in catching her off guard. Once revealed, the Split Worm will open its outer shell-like layer, revealing its mouth to lunge and attack Heather. While not given a concrete description surrounding its meaning, the split head can be interpreted in different ways. Because the Split Worm is parallel to the Split Head from Silent Hill 1, it likely depicts that of an insect-like creature, which subconsciously manifests Alessa's disgust and fear of insects. The phallic-like appearance of the Split Worm can be seen as that of a female ovum, such as an embryonic egg. The physical traits of the Split Worm itself bear resemblance to those of maternity and a child's emergence from the womb. The protective, lavender-colored layer of the shell can represent the uterus encasing and protecting the fetus, given its distinctive human-like features, such as the white teeth and mouth. Connecting this is the previously seen poem on the moonstone door, referring to the cycle of birth, with allusions to a woman's pregnancy. Embodying sheer mass in their hulking appearance, the insane cancer is reminiscent of that of a cancerous disease. With an appearance that exudes a cancerous-like form, the monster has blob-like and tumor-like flesh that manifests this appearance of a monstrous behemoth. The insane cancer, while slow in its movement, will show physical prowess and its strength by attacking Heather with powerful punches, knocking her back. If intimidated, the monster will sprint headfirst into Heather at alarming speeds. The Lost Memories Silent Hill Chronicle mentions that the insane cancer is represented as a cancer running wild, due to the cancer-like appearance it bears. It's possible this theme of cancer can be synonymous with the running themes of disease and death in Silent Hill. In the town's early history, it suffered from an unforeseen plague epidemic that killed off the townspeople. This symbolism is more likely represented through Alessa Gillespie, as she likely saw herself as a literal and figurative disease when it came to her presence around people. In her youth, Alessa was severely bullied through verbal and physical abuse by her classmates, often resulting in her desk having carved scribbles with offensive and hostile words, telling her she's a witch or to go die, treating her as if she was a disease. Alessa's mutilation from the burns she suffered after the ritual performed by her mother saw her with a disturbing appearance, likely perceiving herself as a cancer that refuses to die. Heather descends further into the underpass, making her way through the sewers, eventually stumbling upon a new monster known as the Pendulum, a disturbing, hovering monster with much of its agility being airborne. The Pendulum features two halves of its body stitched by its torsos, with industrial, metal-like blades. The blades are attached to their heads, which they use by gyrating their bodies in a circular, forward motion when engaging with Heather to attack her. While floating, they make a loud, ear-piercing sound that emulates that of a rusty, metal-grinding screeching. In the Lost Memories Silent Hill Chronicle, the Pendulum is derived from the creature's method of attack, which is from its circular motion of rotating its body forward. Because the creature wasn't designed by Masahiro Ito, but rather Jun Inoue, he reiterates that not all the monsters have symbolic meaning to them individually. If we were to try to determine an interpretation of the Pendulum, however, it's likely a manifestation of the embryonic god, more specifically, the cauterization of a fetus. This refers to a surgical procedure in the lining of the uterus, often used as the first method for a pregnant woman undergoing a miscarriage or abortion to abort the fetus. This connects to Heather as her soul journey is aborting this unwarranted embryo of the god that grows inside of her, such as the final act in the story where we see her take a Galaphagus which exorcises the demon. In this context, aborting the fetus of God is an attempt to prevent it from manifesting and growing into its mature form. Furthering this navigation of the complex, maze-like labyrinth of the underpass, Heather eventually finds a garbage room to acquire a hairdryer. Eventually, she finds another room that tells a cautionary tale of a sewer monster, killing most of the staff who worked in the sewers once they encountered the monster, seeing their fate sealed as they would get entrapped by its long, tentacle-like arm and be devoured one by one. To pass the bridge safely to the other side without being overwhelmed by the sewer monster, Heather must use the hairdryer and the outlet to then throw it into the waters below to electrify the monster, effectively killing it. While unidentifiable, the sewer monster, given its long, tentacle-like arm, likely parallels the bloodsucker from Silent Hill 1. Both creatures bear similarities in its appearance and behavior, such as its undesirable lust for blood or to kill and feast on its prey. The monster can also be rooted in Japanese folklore, inspired by the yokai called the Oitekibori, a mysterious apparition that embodies the formation of a human ghost-like entity that approaches a fisherman. As the fisherman sits atop the bridge to catch fish, the Oitekibori reaches out with its long arm to terrorize and disturb the fisherman, attempting to steal and consume his fish. In more disturbing instances, a fisherman can be unlucky, where the Oitekibori will extend its reach to capture its prey and drag them into the depths of the waters below to consume them. Continuing her exploration in the Otherworld Hilltop Center, Heather is introduced to the next monster, known as the Slurper, a crawling, humanoid creature wearing a pig-like mask with a long, pointy snout. The Slurper frequently crawls on floors to await its prey, to then rush them and climb on top of them to slurp them, as the name implies. While they're smaller in scale, They are highly deceptive and intelligent, using their sensitivity to sound to be alerted by nearby prey to know of their location, attacking their prey by grabbing onto them or overwhelming them by knocking them down. Oftentimes, Heather will likely need to remain passive and calm by turning off the flashlight and walking cautiously to not provoke the Slurpers. In the Lost Memories Silent Hill Chronicle, it states that the Slurper is derived from its habit of slurping up rusted colored blood and flesh off the floor with its pointed, long mask. While their interpretation is rather vague, leaving up to speculation behind the symbolic representation they adopt, the Slurper is likely rooted in sexual undertones. With a resemblance to a male in its humanoid-like appearance, the Slurper has a tendency to surprise Heather to then force themselves upon her in a very suggestive position. Because of Heather's fear of stalkers and predators, it's likely that this is manifested and projected into reality as an attempt to overwhelm her by exploiting the subconscious thoughts of rape or sexual assault. Passing the Slurpers, Heather takes an elevator to the first floor. Here, she encounters the Glutton, a massive monster that is littered with rot and decay, trapped in a cylindrical cage, with the mouths comprising the head and the chest. While the monster violently shakes and contorts in its movements, seeming hostile, it poses no threat nor harm when interacting. The Glutton is derived from the fairy tale book that Heather collects throughout the different floors of the Otherworld Hilltop Center, called Tu Fui Ego Eres. The Glutton is reminiscent of the creature in the tale that gobbles up the knights and villagers who attempt to leave their village. This is likely symbolic of Alessa Gillespie wanting to seek freedom from her captivity of being confined to a hospital bed for 7 years. A tall, humanoid monster, the missionary seems intelligent enough to comprehend direct orders from Claudia, such as being ordered to fight Heather and apprehend her. With these human-like qualities, the monster has a burlap sack it wears over its head and a noose around its neck, a surgeon's smock, and rubber gloves stained with blood. As its weapon of choice, it holds 2 tonfa-like blades, which he uses to run directly towards Heather to slash her, and manifesting superhuman reflexes to counter Heather's gunfire, deflecting bullets from it. As the name suggests, the missionary simulates that of a member in a religious group sent to promote its faith or provide services in hopes of enlightening those with indoctrinating their virtues and beliefs. In the Latin translation of the Bible, Jesus Christ sends his disciples to others to preach the gospel in his name. Likewise, it could be interpreted that Claudia, a high priestess in the cult, is appointing the missionary to enlighten and indoctrinate Heather into the cult. Although, through violent and hostile efforts, the apparel of the missionary expresses the surgeon-like attire with a surgeon's smock, rubber gloves with blood, and 2 sharp tonfa-like blades, the themes of forced pregnancy. In childbirth, in some circumstances, there's a method when conceiving a child called cervical dilation, a method involving the surgical removal of a fetus due to the uterus being incapable of pushing out the fetus naturally. This not only applies to childbirth, but also to miscarriage and induced abortion. This connects to Heather's unwillingness to comply with the order in giving birth to the god, resulting in the missionary conducting a forced pregnancy, serving as an allegory of this theme. The nurses in Silent Hill 3 emulate that of proportions of a humanoid creature, lack notable, distinctive qualities such as a bubblehead or parasite on their back. Rather, they adopt a human-like appearance wearing a white nurse's uniform, black bob haircut, eyeshadow, and lipstick. However, one ominous feature is the red square that closes their mouth shut. Furthermore, they're equipped with a revolver or pipe, expressing a hostile nature. According to Lost Memories Silent Hill Chronicle, it's speculated that the nurses were, at some point, likely to be humans transformed into monsters. The common misconception of the nurses is that they're related to the Bubblehead nurses, as they share a familial appearance, aesthetically speaking, alluding to the idea that they're connected. However, Masahiro Ito corrects this by stating that while the Bubblehead nurses and puppet nurses are used as inspiration, they are by no means connected, as each monster is separate from a specific protagonist who is called upon the town of Silent Hill. The nurse is a manifestation derived from Alessa's memories under the treatment of recovering from her wounds after being burned, taken care of and watched over by her caretaker, Lisa Garland. The red square attached to the nurse's mouth is meant to represent the shrieking insanity that was internalized in Alessa as she suffered 7 long years of pain and agony, living in a body that was mutilated beyond repair. This embodies Alessa's internal mental turmoil as the trauma of her bullying from her classmates and Dahlia's physical abuse tormenting her manifested into the nurses to visually express this pain and trauma she suffered. In the 3rd floor patient wing, Heather stumbles upon room S12, which contains a telephone sitting on a desk. Inside the room, Heather suddenly hears the telephone ringing. Picking up the phone, Heather's greeted with silence on the other end of the line. Breaking the tension, Heather says hello. Before she can speak another word, Heather's interrupted by a man's voice that laments about Claudia's behavior, demanding her to apologize for how foolish her dream is to birth a god, by cleansing humankind to seek an eternal paradise. Heather interrupts the man by clarifying that she is not Claudia and her name is Heather. Heather asks the man who he is, only to be revealed as Leonard Wolf, and that Claudia is his daughter. Heather tells Leonard, with hesitation, that she plans to kill Claudia. Surprisingly, Leonard seems rather calm and collected, given the fact that Heather wants to kill his own daughter. Heather gives her reasoning behind her intentions, as Claudia willingly killed her father, giving her justification for her act of revenge. While understanding her position, Leonard still acknowledges that Claudia is his daughter by blood, reasoning with Heather to stop her act in killing Claudia. Leonard offers to help her stop Claudia if she frees him from captivity. Agreeing, Leonard instructs Heather to head to the end of the hallway to room M on the second floor patient wing. Heather finds herself on the first floor patient wing. Continuing down the hall into room C4, Heather finds an altar with items that are placed for a ritual. Heather places the plastic bag with blood onto the altar and drenches it with blood to commence the ritual. Once completed, Heather sees the floor reveal a hidden passageway with a ladder leading down below to meet Leonard Wolf. Heather descends the ladder to find a large room filled with muddy, putrid water. Here, Heather finally meets Leonard. However, much to her dismay, Heather finds out while Leonard is in opposition to Claudia's plans to bring an eternal paradise through her methods, he still is one to seek out the salvation for the paradise they prophesize. Heather, apathetic to the man's plans and clearly not showing interest in the belief or ideals of the cults, gives Leonard the wrong impression, and he becomes offended by her lack of care, seeing her as a non-believer. Caught in this delusional state of mind, Leonard believes Heather deceived him, solely to gain the seal of Metatron for herself to destroy God. Heather clarifies that she wasn't trying to trick him, rather believed they had a miscommunication about each other's intentions. Even though Heather tries her best to be rational and communicate with Leonard with the best intentions, Leonard is too clouded by his judgment. Leonard reveals himself to be a transformed monster and engages in a battle with Heather. In his true form, Leonard appears reptilian-like, covered with a disease-ridden, yellow skin-like appearance, with his body heavily mutilated beyond recognition. Leonard uses sharp, blade-like tendrils for his hands to slash and inflict damage on Heather, and if he's damaged, uses the underwater environment to his advantage, as he appears amphibious, having the ability to roam underwater for long, indefinite periods without drowning. In his past, Leonard Wolf was another follower of the cults, the Order, and immersed not only himself, but also his daughter forcefully, Claudia Wolf, into the Order's religious practices and sermons, whether she was willing or not. If Claudia were to show irreligious behavior, he'd lash out in anger and physically beat her. Throughout the many years of physical abuse, Claudia's religious and physical trauma consumed her, converting her into the cults, eventually assuming the position of the High Priestess of the Order. Because Alessa and Claudia were best friends in their youth, it's possible Leonard was an acquaintance of Dahlia Gillespie, but as to what the relationship was, is unknown. At some point when he was much older, Leonard was institutionalized at Brookhaven Hospital. He was stripped of his position in the cults due to his erratic and aggressive behavior that was potentially seen as a threat or danger to others. Furthering this study of Leonard's behavior, a doctor's note evaluating Leonard's mental state documented that Leonard is cooperative and has a strong passion for justice, however, can easily become violent and hostile when overexcited or deeply upset, such as the staff expressing their opposition towards his enforced religious practices upon them without their consent. The doctor also notes Leonard displaying mild hallucinations, emotional instability, and obsessive ideas, concluding that Leonard potentially suffers from schizophrenia. It's unknown as to what or how Leonard became corrupted with his transformation to his monster form, or if he's even a monster at all, given his seemingly normal tone when he communicates with Heather, as he seemingly has the ability to have intelligible speech. After reading Harry's notes, Heather finds herself on the happy carousel. While here, Heather notices the horses spraying gas that will, over time, kill her, unless she kills all the horses before time runs out. After committing this act, Heather finds the happy carousel spinning faster, emulating a sequence of time passing. In this transition, we see a figure emerge from the darkness, revealing itself as the memory of Alessa. A bloody, corrupted, diseased doppelganger of Heather. The memory of Alessa serves as Alessa's dark and negative thoughts derived from her subconscious that she suppresses, manifested into reality. Much of the appearance of memory of Alessa shows mutilation marks, disease-ridden skin, decayed flesh, serving as allusions to Alessa's painful trauma of being burned alive and in solitary confinement for 7 years, suffering in agony. The memory of Alessa is a manifestation of Alessa's subconscious desires and thoughts that want to stop and kill the birth of God, to spare the world from suffering the same pain she felt, opting for a quick death, as it would not only stop the birth of God, but also allow her to die. This boss fight takes place on a carousel, which is symbolic of the halo of the sun, specifically the 3 outer rings, serving as a cycle of rebirth, representing past, present, and future. The environment speeds up rampantly once it's in motion, and it's never ending, symbolizing the passage of time that Alessa spent for years in her suffering and, metaphorically speaking, visualizing the never-ending pain she experienced, as the center of the carousel shows a burned figure constantly on fire. Tragically, the memory of Alessa believed that the only way to escape from her pain and suffering was death. Because Heather is a reincarnation of Alessa, Heather also shared these subconscious thoughts of death, believing that if she were to die herself, the series of events happening with the birth of the god, as well as the pain, trauma, and tragedy she and Alessa both feel could finally end. However, the duality of these two bloodstained philosophies deviates with Heather coming to realize that by confronting memory of Alessa to kill her to not only end her pain and suffering, but rather come to the conclusion that the memories of this trauma will live on, and that in her death, it doesn't have to define her. Instead, choose to accept this inescapable past life and learn from it to move on to a better tomorrow, putting an end to Alessa's pain. After leaving the room, Heather encounters the next monster, known as the Scrapper. Similar in appearance and behavior to the missionary, the Scrapper holds the same abilities as the missionary, although much smaller and weaker, appearing as a medium-sized humanoid-like monster with a brown butcher's smock and sack over its head, wearing bloody rubber gloves and equipped with tonfa-like blades as its weapon, scraping together as it makes a sharp, ear-piercing sound with metal grinding. It's implied that the Scrappers may be followers of the cult, derived as monstrous manifestations from Claudia's subconscious, and how she potentially perceives her followers as tools and using them for her grand scheme of birthing the god and creating a new eternal paradise. Because the Scrapper has a similar resemblance to the missionary, it's likely meant to torment Heather as a reminder of the monster that killed her father, given its appearance the moment after she reads Harry's diary. Following this encounter with the Scrapper, she furthers her journey to the lower level of the chapel, entering a hallway to find a disturbing scene of 2 female bodies side by side, hanging from a contraption as their bodies are draped over by a curtain, only revealing their legs and feet. These 2 girls are meant to serve as connections to Alessa and Cheryl. Underneath these bodies is a monster that we've seen recurringly in the background, known as Valtiel. One of the more unique monsters, Valtiel is distinct from the other monsters in-game as he remains completely passive, as opposed to the more aggressive and hostile nature. This is because Valtiel serves as the attendant of God, depicted as one of God's angels, whose sole purpose is to help oversee the birth of God. The Order believes that Valtiel is instrumental to the religious practices and rituals they conduct, even devoting a religious sector titled the Valtiel Sector. The Valtiel Sector served under the belief that Valtiel was a saint who corresponded to that of an angel who served under God, believing that Valtiel was connected and derived from the figure in Jewish mysticism known as Metatron, often described as the highest of angels with various roles including celestial scribe and mediator between God and humanity, serving as the guide and speaker for God to lead humanity to salvation in his presence. Valtiel's power is so vast and immense that he's implied to retain the properties of resurrection. If Heather were to die, there's a possibility to see a unique and rare cutscene of Heather lying down, incapacitated or diseased. We see Valtiel come to her aid and take her to presumably a passive and safer area to resurrect Heather. Valtiel isn't necessarily deemed as a guardian or protector of Heather per se, but rather the fetus growing inside of her, that of course being God. In a last-ditch effort, Heather grabs the pendant that Harry gave her, revealing that the red liquid inside is Glophodus. Heather then swallows the liquid to exorcise the fetus inside of her, seeing her vomit it out. As Heather is about to kill the fetus, Claudia, out of desperation, swallows the fetus. Afterward, she's seen slowly contracting in pain as she gives birth to God, seeing her fall through a hole in the ground. This violent imagery symbolizes a ruptured vaginal introitus, simulating the vaginal tears of a violent and traumatic birth. Heather jumping down the hole to kill God can be seen as a metaphor for abortion, as she aborts the baby by killing God. Once down the hole, Heather witnesses God in all of its horrifying glory. Valtiel is seen unwrapping the God with a blanket sheet, revealing an appearance that adopts similarities to that of Alessa Gillespie. It's possible that the collective conscious thought of the cult members derived the idolization of their god as Alessa. In the Order's corrupted image of Alessa, they devoted their love and worshipped her as the mother who sacrificed her life to give birth to God. However, even if the intentions are pure, God is perceived as demonic as opposed to divine. Symbolic of the Order and their practices when it comes to their teachings of their devoted faith that is or never was divine, but in truth, demonic. Furthering this ignorance of the Order's blind faith is the veil that is draped over God by Valtiel. Typically, in Christian, Judaism, or even Islamic cultures, the practice of covering a woman's faith with a veil signifies purity, innocence, and the transition into a new life. However, the veil can also represent the separation between God and humanity, representing spiritual blindness or a lack of understanding, preventing people from fully grasping God's truth. Ironically, this can be applied to the Order as they rely on blind faith when it comes to grasping the concept of God. For the Order, they lack the understanding of the teachings of God creating humanity, as opposed to their doctrine, which is humanity creating God. In this final confrontation of God, Heather sees a monstrosity before her, seeking death as it shrieks in agony and pain. Heather finds Claudia's clothing on the floor, with her missing, assuming she died during the process of birthing God. With the world at stake, Heather engages in the final battle with God. After a long, painful, and emotional battle, Heather finally defeats God, falling to her knees in defeat. Even though Heather won the battle, she doesn't feel relief with a sense of victory, but rather, grief, as she sheds tears, lamenting by her father's death. While she defeated God, saving humanity from its inevitable demise, she still couldn't save her dad, and killing God wasn't going to bring him back. After mourning, Heather returns to Douglas, finding him lying on a park bench, fatigued from his wounds. Pleased to see Heather alive and putting an end to Claudia's plans and the Order's reign of terror, Douglas smiles with contentment. After asking Heather if the Order is truly over, suddenly, the mood shifts as Heather approaches him with a knife, telling him it isn't over, as he is still left alive. Moments after, Heather jokingly lunges at Douglas, pretending she's going to stab him as if she were possessed. Douglas, finding Heather's quote-unquote joke distasteful, is about to ask her a question, but is interrupted by her telling him he doesn't have to call her Heather anymore. But instead, she decides to readopt her previous name, Cheryl, learning to accept her past lives as not painful memories, but rather a part of who she was, accepting that this trauma and tragedy may have defined her past, but it doesn't have to define her future. As Henry waits for Cynthia after a long period of time, he is then confronted unexpectedly by a mutilated, decayed dog, as it's thrown out of the restroom. Close by are other dog-like monsters, grouping around the incapacitated monster to consume its flesh. The monster, Sniffer Dog, is a canine-like creature that appears in dirty, leathery, decayed-like skin that exposes much of their flesh, with burned, mutilated patches that appear all over the body. When hearing a loud, audible sound, they are immediately alerted to their prey and will echo a loud snarl before hunting them down. They typically appear in a pack, either as males or females. Interestingly, the male variant is notable in its visible eyes, ears, and green-like fur, with an elongated red tongue, while the female variant is noticeable with missing its eyes and ears, while coated with a brown-like fur with an elongated purple tongue. As their name implies, the sniffer dog is usually seen in either groups or alone, feasting upon its prey, which is typically depicted as a monster's corpse. They consume their food by using their long, slithery tongue by slurping and sucking its blood to consume as food. They are notable in their agility, as they're seen as fast predators that can outrun their prey, as they have prominent speed and a powerful lunge. Because they are agile, especially susceptible to loud noises, walking passively and far from the sniffer dog will not alert them. A sniffer dog is symbolic of Walter Sullivan's disdain for animals, as he found animals intimidating after a bad experience with one when he was much younger. This fear would be manifested when Walter would visit a pet shop in his youth and was nearly bitten by a dog, scarring the poor child. The first ghost that Henry encounters is named Jimmy Stone, a cultist who served under the religious cult, the Order, who was positioned as a priest and executioner under the Valtiel sector. Jimmy Stone dates back to the early history of the town of Silent Hill. more specifically, under his ancestor, Reverend Stone. Reverend Stone, while not serving under the position of the role in the order, rather as a Christian preacher in the communal church in Silent Hill, Maine, during the 1860s, would indirectly influence the practices and teachings of Jimmy Stone, albeit for more nefarious and immoral purposes. As a member serving under the Valtiel sector, Jimmy Stone served under Valtiel, among those in his faction who believed that Valtiel was closer to God, as he served as a scribe. Valtiel played the important role of ensuring the birth of God, delivered from its surrogate mother to rebirth the world under a new paradise. As the Valtiel sector served as not only priests but executioners, this would see these ritualistic practices and performances conducted by Jimmy Stone. The executioners would wear red triangular hoods with white ceremonial robes, modeled after Valtiel. This would earn Jimmy Stone the nickname the Red Devil. On one fateful day, a young Walter would be groomed and influenced under Jimmy Stone's accomplice, George Roston, to conduct the 21 Sacraments ritual, which would inadvertently backfire for both Jimmy and George. Because George influenced Walter to be indoctrinated under the practices and beliefs of Valtiel, he would manifest this and carry out his first murder, Jimmy Stone, by sneaking up behind him and shooting him with a handgun behind the head. Because of the 21 Sacraments ritual commenced accordingly, this would see Jimmy Stone become Walter's first of many victims to fall prey to him and be damned to becoming a ghost wandering his other worlds forever. Close by is another one of the ghosts that was murdered by Walter as his 14th victim, named Toby Archbold, a priest who conducted under the Holy Mother sector of the order. Toby conducted much of his operations in the Silent Hill Wish House orphanage. Upon the aftermath of the deaths of both Jimmy Stone and George Roston, this would prove detrimental to the Valtiel sector, as their influence under the order continued to dissolve. As this would be damaging to the order, Toby decided in a fit of desperation to preserve the Holy Mother sector by increasing its influence under legal business practices by selling marijuana in secret. Because of the success of his illegal operations, Toby would preserve and reopen Silent Hill Wish House Orphanage, getting monumental praise and respect amongst his peers. This feat would not go unnoticed and would see Toby elected as one of the members of the city council for Silent Hill due to his contributions. However, this short time of glory would see Toby see time catch up with him, as he would last be seen deceased after a visit to Mexico, as his cause of death would be due to being pushed off a cliff by Walter Sullivan. Rushing to Cynthia, Henry enters a prolonged flight of moving escalators to be met with a new monster called the Wallman. A lanky, flesh-like humanoid monster attached to the wall at its waist sees the Wallman stuck and immobile, incapable of movement. However, as their upper torso has control and freedom, they are still a threat that can be brutal if caught in their crosshairs. While its attack is simplistic, only having the ability to swing both of its arms, its attack is powerful enough to knock down Henry in just one swing. Furthering their physical attacks is their intelligence, as they can camouflage themselves in walls, surprising their victim by attacking them suddenly. The Wallman can be symbolic of Walter's fear of isolation, confinement, and claustrophobia. There are many themes seen throughout the story that force Henry to enter tight and linear spaces to make him comfortable with being uncomfortable, such as crawling through tight, linear holes, looking into holes, or being stuck inside his own apartment. Walter, seen as having nowhere to go but to survive for much of his life without a home, can see the places surrounding him as hostile and lacking the hospitality he desired. Henry finds himself in a forest world known as Silent Hill Woods. Wandering into the dark, foreboding forest, Henry soon encounters a massive swarm of monstrous moth-like bat creatures called the Hummer. These agile creatures are small in its size, appearing as an amalgamation of a bird, presumably a hummingbird, as the name implies, and a bat, as they encompass a long, needle-like beak whilst having black wings to fly around. They tend to make loud, humming, buzz-like sounds when alerted to someone's presence. While not extremely hostile in its attacks, they're rather seen as irritating when Henry is overwhelmed in large groups, swarming Henry by dealing only minor damage. They can, however, be easily disposed of with a melee weapon or firearm with just one attack, resulting in them falling onto the ground. Because the Hummer has similarities to a hummingbird and a bat, in juxtaposition to their design, they likely can be symbolic of peace, yet also death. According to Native Americans, they depict the hummingbird as a symbol of love, peace, and joy. In conjunction with this belief, the natives also saw bats as a symbol of shamanic death and rebirth. It's believed that shamans who undergo ritualistic death confront their fears and self-transformation. This juxtaposition with the hummingbird and bat theme with the Hummer could encompass Walter's goal in achieving peace and joy through the completion of the 21 Sacraments ritual, proposed to bring him close to his mother, which is what he wanted for his whole life. However, in undergoing this process, this transformed Walter into malicious, sadistic, and sociopathic serial killer who killed innocent people for his selfish desires, seeing him also needing to die to be reborn to achieve this goal. Henry is then met with an ex-ghost named Steve Garland, a man who owned and ran a pet shop located in the heart of South Ashfield named Garland. Like his pet store name implies, Steve Garland had a fondness for animals as he despised humans, due to their behavior easily angering him. 26 years ago, Steve was one day going about his routine at his pet store as if it were any other normal day. However, this day in particular would leave an everlasting impression on him as he would meet a young Walter Sullivan. Minding his business, Walter would speculate and roam the pet store, only to then handle a cage with an animal inside, to which he would accidentally drop and injure the animal in the process. This enraged Steve, as he would kick out the young Walter, which left him traumatized from the experience, but also grow a fear and hatred towards animals, possibly blaming Steve because of the event. 26 years later passed. Steve Garland would once again go about his standard routine, and, as fate would have it, an older Walter Sullivan would abruptly appear at Garland's pet store. Walter would then go about brutally murdering Steve with a submachine gun, leaving him numerous bullet wounds all over his body, except the chest area, to extract his heart. As if it wasn't enough, Walter would vent his anger and lash out towards the rest of the remaining animals by killing all of them with his submachine gun. Steve Garland would be Walter's fourth victim. Henry then makes his way to the third floor of the water prison to encounter a horrific, massive monster-like entity called the Twin Victim. This large creature appears to wear a black smock that is tattered and worn out, which bears a feather-like quality to his clothing texture. The smock is worn as a hood over the two conjoined twins with baby-like faces. The conjoined twins are shown to have ash-white pale skin, an enormous adult build, and long arms, which are used as a means of traversal as the creature lacks a pair of legs. The Twin Victim is seen as a very observant enemy type, as it is typically seen roaming around its environment, preying on its next victim. If Henry is spotted by the Twin Victim, they will directly point at him before charging and then lunging at him as their form of attack. If Henry happens to be close to their position, they will attack him with their arm with a powerful swing to knock him down. If Henry successfully lands a hit to deal damage to them, they fall down incapacitated and cry and pout as if they were throwing a temper tantrum. The Twin Victims, while notably terrifying in their massive size and appearance, are, in actuality, a tragic set of twins who were, unfortunately, brutally murdered by Walter Sullivan. Their names were Miriam and Billy Locane. Around the time of the twins' murder, in an article discovered by James Sunderland in the garbage disposal of Woodside Apartments, titled Murder Incident Article, discusses the arrest of the prolific serial killer named Walter Sullivan. It was reported by the police that the tragedy took place in front of the Locane household, as the twins' corpses were discovered on their front street. Both Miriam and Billy Locane were brutally slaughtered and killed by an axe. Once deceased, Walter Sullivan removed both of their hearts respectively. Henry then encounters a humanoid, monkey-like creature called a gumhead, reeking of molted, gray skin that appears decayed. These creatures embody an amalgamation of a humanoid-like appearance and radiate the sounds of monkey-like screeching or grunting. The gumheads come in two variants. The old type is completely gray and seen as commons, seen with large, tumor-like growths on their neck that are exposed and stretched out, and a mutilated face that looks melted. The new types have red patches that appear as scrapes or cut marks, with a similar cancer-like growth exposed. Gumheads are depicted as having lower intelligence, as seen in both their behavior and vocalizations. They are typically seen as primitive in their mannerisms, and may make ape-like sound in their speech. Although they may not be intelligent as other monsters, they are still a threat not to be trifled with. When attacking, the gumhead is seen as rather playful when it comes to its prey, as they're incredibly agile in their movement by using the legs to hop back and forth. Typically, they're seen either striking Henry with their arms or biting him. They are seen as much more ruthless if they procure a melee weapon. The gumhead could serve as a symbolic representation of Walter's adverse feelings towards society, and how he perceives people, presumably men, given the more masculine appearance of the gumhead, as lesser than, which is supported due to lack of intelligence and primitive-like mannerisms. Throughout much of Walter's life, his interactions with others were negative and emotionally traumatic experiences that affected him in his upbringing. These interactions with more masculine figures resulted in this form of animalistic abuse and lack of emotional empathy expressed towards a young Walter. As Henry continues to explore the building world, Henry finds an apartment room with a ghost on the floor, incapacitated with a large sword that penetrates through his chest. This ghost is named Eric Walsh. On the day of his birthday, Eric was eagerly anticipating a special day, as he was looking forward to spending time with his family. While he was working as a bartender at Bar South Ashfield, he met a customer with whom he had an idle conversation with. As he was serving the customer told Eric about the recent murder of the pet store owner, Steve Garland, and the rest of the animals that were brutally slaughtered, warning him to tread carefully as eyewitnesses reported that the murderer was still at large. With this information in mind, Eric made sure to close the bar early and was off shift earlier than usual, due to the recent events of the murder close by. Although weary, and understandably alarmed about the murder, Eric still looked forward to spending his birthday with his family. Once Eric arrived home, a feast and cake were prepared for him, surprising him. However, it wasn't his family who were there to surprise him. Instead, it was the serial killer, Walter Sullivan, who wished him a happy birthday as he shot Eric point blank in his face with a handgun, killing him instantly. Eric Walsh would become Walter's 10th victim, amassing in quantity, appearing as a tall, slender, fungi-like creature that appears in various locations throughout Walter's other worlds. The toadstool serves as an obstacle that blocks Henry's path in tight, linear spaces. While they do pose as a threat when blocking Henry's means of traversal, they don't oppose much of an offensive attack as they remain passive. Unless touched when making close contact, they are easily removed and defeated with either a melee weapon or a firearm. The toadstool can be viewed as an allegory for death and rebirth. Because mushrooms operate strictly in the ground of the earth, they can be seen as representing decay and infection. As decomposers, fungi thrive on dead matter, creating new life from what has perished. Because of the everlasting presence of the toadstool throughout Walter's other worlds, it can be symbolic of the death suffered by Walter's victims. Their presence, figuratively speaking, serves as a form of decay and infection that rots and plagues the memories manifested from his other worlds. Before leaving room 301, Henry is met with another one of the ghosts, a middle-aged woman named Sharon Blake. Sharon was seen as self-aware and incredibly skeptical of Silent Hill, specifically the cult that ran the Wish House orphanage. As her family had lived in Silent Hill, they were indoctrinated into the cult and frequented the Silent Hill church. Although Sharon was persuaded by her family to join the cult, she denied her family's advances as she knew the true ulterior motives the cult practiced, deeming them as fraud. After some time, without hearing from her family, she began to grow worried and decided to go check on them for reassurance. Upon visiting Silent Hill, Sharon would venture into Silent Hill Woods to seek out answers from the Wish House orphanage, in hopes of getting an answer for her family's absence. Along the way, as she explores the woods, she finds a gravesite, and much to her misfortune, sees her family's gravestones. As if on cue, Sharon is inconveniently caught by Walter Sullivan as he happens to be in the area. Without receiving the chance to grieve for her family, Walter would forcefully grab Sharon, dragging her to Toluca Lake and proceeding to drown her until she died. Sharon Blake would become Walter's 13th victim. Inside room 102, Henry finds a group of larvae, leech-like insects called tremor. These huge leeches vary in size, are coated in slime, and slither along either the floors or walls. While the tremor doesn't pose any particular threat, as they're easily avoidable and not necessarily a hostile enemy, they can prove to be a nuisance. If Henry were to make close contact with the tremor, they would inflict slight damage as they burst open. Henry can easily stomp on them, which instantaneously kills them. The tremor can be symbolic of a parasite, as they're first witnessed in the water prison world, and then afterwards appear in every single one of Walter's other worlds soon after. It's possible that the memories of Walter's parents that were seen from the perspective of the other apartment residents, such as Frank Sunderland, internalized their thoughts about the abandonment of Walter, perceiving him as a form of a parasite that would leech onto his parents, more specifically, his mother. The wheelchair is a possessed object that is controlled by a translucent ghost. While simplistic in nature, compared to the more formidable ghosts or monsters seen previously, the wheelchair is just as competent in proving to be a threat to Henry. It's very agile when it comes to momentum, never stopping and moving up and down in an orderly fashion while breaking its movement cycle. If Henry were to make contact with the wheelchair, it would see him get knocked down and stunned briefly. Because of their ghostly presence, they function similarly to the ghost enemies who cannot be killed and thus are invulnerable. The wheelchairs could be symbolic of Walter's disdain for hospitals. It also could be a manifestation of Walter's memories in the hospital when he was previously taken care of as a baby by the hospital staff during that time in his life, before shortly being adopted by Silent Hill Wishall's orphanage. As Henry and Eileen continue to escape the hospital world, they encounter, at the end of the long hallway on the second floor, a group of monsters called the Patient. This tall, grotesque, humanoid monster resembles that of a decayed corpse wearing a hospital gown, with molted, grey ashy skin, along with chunks of its flesh missing throughout its body. The Patient moves very menacingly as it walks toward Henry, and, in once in close contact, continuously swings its melee weapon in a motion that never ends. While opposing in size, they can easily be taken down with a firearm or a perfectly timed swing. The Patient could be symbolic of Walter's mother, specifically the allegory of childbirth. Walter is seen previously removing not only the Patient's stomach, but also her uterus. As a result, the Patient emits a loud, burping sound due to the extraction of these bodily functions. This could allude to Walter, metaphorically speaking, wanting to be reborn inside of his mother's womb. Henry is met with a ghost that is manifested from the corpse of Cynthia Velasquez, called Victim 16. Much like the previous ghost encountered, Victim 16 functions similarly. However, she is defined as a new type. Victim 16 will use her long black hair to tangle and trap Henry, becoming susceptible to taking damage, impaling Henry by reaching into his body to grab his heart. While avoidable and optional, it's best to dispose of these new types as they can be re-encountered on a consecutive basis, making progression harder. To dispose of Victim 16, much like the previous ghosts, it's best to use the Sword of Obedience to incapacitate her effectively. Nearby, Henry encounters the next monster called the Greedy Worm. This colossal behemoth is a large, slimy worm that is seen protruding out of the walls. These worm-like creatures are unkillable, but interestingly, can take damage. Although they aren't remotely depicted as a threat or dangerous, they are still a manifestation of Walter's other worlds, as they can be seen in various locations, enacting similar behavior. The Greedy Worm may be symbolic of serving as the connection as a primary link between the various other worlds manifested by Walter Sullivan. Elsewhere in Silent Hill Woods, Henry and Eileen eventually encounter Victim 17, the ghost of Jasper Gain. Victim 17 is depicted on fire, alluding to Jasper's cause of death through immolation. His body is seen as charred, mutilated, and constantly burning on fire. His attacks can be deadly as he uses the candlestick to inflict damage upon Henry, while simultaneously grappling with him. Much like Victim 16, Victim 17 is a formidable threat that can be a hindrance much later if not dealt with upon first encounter. It's best that Henry uses the same medallion, silver bullet, or candle to exercise the demonic energy, to then use the Sword of Obedience to pin down Victim 17, incapacitating him for good. As they further their descent, they come face to face with Victim 18, the ghost form of Andrew DeSalvo. Much like the prior new type of ghost, Victim 18 has its unique set of perks that can be seen as imposing. Victim 18 sustains the ability to use his entire body to convert himself into a barrel roll to launch himself at Henry, dealing lots of damage. Along with his attack, Victim 18 has a strong aura that negatively affects Henry's Saint Medallion, depleting it much faster. Unlike the previous victims, Victim 18 is much tougher to defeat, as it requires an elaborate effort to effectively incapacitate him for good. To do so, Henry must use a handgun and insert the silver bullet to fire at Victim 18, causing him to become stunned briefly. Moments later, Henry would need to use the Sword of Obedience to effectively defeat Victim 18. Upon arrival, they are immediately met with Victim 19, the ghost of Richard Braintree. The final set of new type ghost, Victim 19, encompasses unique abilities that are similar to those of the previous new type ghosts met previously. Due to his death by electrocution, Richard's body movements emulate those of the sporadic movements of someone getting shocked, resulting in their body convulsing violently. This is depicted in his ghost form, as much of his movement is erratic, as he swings his crowbar violently in a glitch-like momentum. His movement is extremely unpredictable, as Victim 19 can be seen moving in slow motion while moving forward, but simultaneously moving backwards in a sudden, fast motion. Furthermore, the movement is not only specific to Richard walking in an unstable motion, but could also see him possess the ability to teleport in close proximity, as well as phase through inanimate objects if his victim chooses to run away from him. Henry comes across another ghost named Peter Wells. Peter Wells was a high school student who was known to indulge in smoking marijuana, seen amongst his peers as an addict. One day, Peter was smoking marijuana in a secluded alleyway across from one of the streets in South Ashfield. It was rumored that he bought marijuana off of Toby Archbold, the priest who worked for the order. While with his friends in the alleyway, Peter noticed the ladder and decided to be devious and climbed the ladder to amuse his friends with his antics. However, as Peter reached the top of the ladder, he was nowhere to be found, as he mysteriously vanished moments later. It was later found that he was brutally beaten to death in a hotel room in South Ashfield Hotel. The murderer was Walter Sullivan. Peter Wells would become the 12th victim of Walter Sullivan. The one truth, much like the wallman, appears to protrude out of the wall that is attached to a metal frame, with its flesh stretched outwards as it's attached to each corner of the frame. Due to the one truth's ability to scale up and down, it is agile in evading Henry and Eileen's attacks. To make his attacks count, Henry would have to charge his melee weapon as he stands in front of the one truth of his choosing, and have to time his swing to accurately hit the monster, causing it to be stunned once hit. In doing so, upon complete succession of these melee swings, once defeated, the one truth will ascend upwards. However, the monster will respawn after some time. To properly defeat the one truth, Henry needs to find the one truth as the name implies, and once dealt damage, the true one will be revealed, as once it is hit, the rest of the monsters will also receive damage. The one truth can be a symbolic representation in the literal and figurative sense of the truth behind the 21 sacraments, and the role Walter Sullivan plays in orchestrating his master plan. Henry is depicted as a receiver of wisdom, acknowledging that he values perspective in seeing others' thoughts and wanting to help them, driven by empathy and his care for other people. The battle against the one truth could serve as a test in seeing if Henry is worthy of embodying this role. This also could be a test by Joseph Scriber, testing Henry to see if he has what it takes to defeat Walter Sullivan. In room 301, Henry then encounters the bottom, a horribly disfigured face with a cancerous-like body protruding mass of flesh. The bottom bears similarities of the gumhead in appearance, but also the twin victim in its size. Much like the twin victim, they exude the same behavior, standing stationary unless witnessed by Henry and provoked enough to where they will point at him and immediately chase him down, to then lunge at him or swipe their arms to attack him. They are seen as stronger variants of the twin victim, as they have higher durability and their health and strength. The bottom could be a manifestation of Walter's disdain for his parents' abandonment of him at birth. From the design, the bottom shows the head popping out of the bottom of its lower body, which could be symbolic of Walter being born, while the top of the body sees two conjoined heads, which could represent his parents. This decayed, cancerous, and disgusting version could be his internalized thoughts of his parents now that he is older and has time to reflect on his birth. Born into a world unwanted and unloved by his parents, saw the tragic fate of an infant named Walter Sullivan, tossed aside and left by himself. His father complained and yelled toward his wife with phrases such as "stupid little crybaby" and "shut the hell up. You can't blame it all on me." Over the birth of Walter, his mother was left quiet as she never once spoke about his name or how she felt toward her son, regardless of her feelings, whether they were mutual or not. The wife willingly left with her husband, leaving the infant alone in the apartment of room 302. Not too long after, the superintendent of South Ashfield Heights, Frank Sunderland, noticed a loud, audible, sad cry of a baby screeching across the hall. Curious and concerned, Frank heads to room 302, only to stumble upon the shocking sight of a newly born infant. Frank was left speechless as to why his parents abandoned him. It was speculated that they got into financial issues or were in serious debt, owing loans to bad people, which saw them on the run. Whatever the definite reason is unknown, but what is known is that Frank would carry the young infant and give him to the nearby St. Jerome Hospital. Frank would keep Walter's umbilical cord, as he saw this as too precious to throw away, keeping the item for many years. Walter would become a ward at the hospital and eventually be set up for adoption. He would be adopted by the Silent Hill Wish House Orphanage. It was here, during his upbringing, that Walter will receive his formal name and would become enlightened by the teachings of the cults, the Order. If Walter were to misbehave, he would, much like the other children, be sent to the water prison, a cylindrical prison located in a sea of surrounding water in the heart of Toluca Lake. It was here that Walter, unfortunately, crossed paths with a heartless and inhumane man named Andrew DeSalvo, who would take pleasure in physically abusing the children. One altercation saw the young Walter and his friend, Bob, see Andrew one day either kill Bob or make him disappear, as Bob is never heard or seen from again. To make matters worse, Andrew would force Walter to drink water with leeches in it, traumatizing the poor child. When Walter was 6 years old, he learned how to read and write, and he began to keep a diary. At the time, the priestess of the cult, Dahlia Gillespie, was said to emotionally manipulate the young, gullible, innocent Walter about how his mother was asleep, and if he were to read the 21 Sacraments, he could potentially meet her one day. Walter, believing Dahlia's words, would take this to heart. However, he would misinterpret her message and instead believe that his mother is not inside room 302, but is room 302 itself. With this preconceived notion, Walter would travel every single week to South Ashfield Heights in hopes of one day seeing his mother. Much to his misfortune, Walter would find that room 302 was occupied by a resident, forcing him to meander and wait outside, hoping one day he'd finally get to meet his mother. For many years, Walter would travel to South Ashfield Heights just to wait and lurk around room 302. This would see the surrounding residences of the apartment complex come to know the child's presence. The tenants would begin to complain due to Walter's obsessive antics and behavior, causing one of the tenants, Richard Braintree, to complain and ridicule the child whenever he noticed him by room 302. Walter would see the residents of South Ashfield Heights as an obstacle, preventing him from seeing his mother. Because of this, he would eventually stop coming to room 302. At some point during his stay at the Wish House Orphanage, Walter would be secretly taught by one of the priest members of the Valtiel sector, George Roston. George would secretly instruct Walter on the 21 Sacraments ritual, and in doing this would let Valtiel, the sector's angel, live inside of his unconscious. Walter would receive the nickname the Red Devil. Walter would grow up to practice the occult-like teachings of the 21 Sacraments, plotting one day to seek out this master plan. At some point, Walter would eventually leave the Silent Hill Wish House Orphanage and become homeless, living amongst the city streets of South Ashfield, as he had no source of income to pay for basic living necessities, such as food, clothes, or a home. One day, Walter would encounter a young girl named Eileen Galvin. Out of the kindness of her heart, she would console him by giving him her doll, in hopes that he could sleep warmly with the company of the doll, and not have to be sad because the doll would be his friend. This exchange would make Walter cry uncontrollably, as Eileen would possibly be the only person in his life who showed him true, genuine, emotional empathy and care. During his time still homeless, Walter would be seen frequently sleeping in a tattered and withered sleeping bag at the South Ashfield station, begging for a spare change from the common folk, in hopes of surviving another day. It's here where he would formally introduce himself to a young Cynthia Velasquez, although he would previously know of her, as throughout the years he would see her from afar, frequenting the station with her school friends. In this encounter, Cynthia would grow disgusted and creeped out by him, due to his disgusting smell and his revealing that he had been watching her for over a decade without her knowing. Once Walter turned 18 years old, he eventually moved to Pleasant River to study at the University of Pleasant River as a college student. For a while, Walter lived a seemingly normal life. However, the thoughts lingered in his subconscious about the inevitability of his mother being reborn and his chance of getting to meet her. With these internalized thoughts grew bitterness and resentment toward the world for those who wronged him. Walter would eventually snap and realize his true purpose, accepting what he must do: complete the Descent of the Holy Mother, 21 Sacraments ritual. At the age of 24, Walter would then orchestrate his first round of sacrifices. According to the scripture, Walter would need to murder and sacrifice 10 victims and extract their hearts, which would coincide with the 10 Hearts theme of the ritualistic performance. Walter would seek out his victims and ultimately successfully murder 10 of these people, removing their hearts. Interestingly, Walter would make no effort to strategically cover his tracks, as the police would eventually catch on to his murders. These group of murders would be renowned as the Walter Sullivan case, which would be infamously spread across the world. After the murders of Miriam and Billy Locane, Walter would be apprehended for the murders of the Locane twins. Once in prison, Walter took a spoon and stabbed himself in the neck, committing suicide inside his prison cell. However, from the reports from an investigative journalist, Joseph Scriber, he believed that this Walter Sullivan was a fake, speculating that the police falsely incarcerated a proxy that was impersonating Walter Sullivan, while the real Walter Sullivan was still roaming out freely. A few days after the Walter Sullivan case was considered solved, witnesses from South Ashfield Heights reported a long blonde-haired man with a coat walking inside the hallways of the apartment complex. Richard Braintree noticed the man moving a large, inanimate object into room 302. Walter would enter room 302 and use the storage room to perform the second phase of the 21 Sacraments ritual, the Holy Assumption. This required Walter to perform a ritualistic suicide, which would see him released from the bonds of the flesh and gain the power from heaven. Walter would become the 11th sacrament. Once he died, he gained the supernatural ability to be reborn as a ghostly apparition and create other worlds to capture his next 10 victims without consequences. Walter would then commence the final phase of the 21 Sacraments ritual. Henry finds himself in a large arena with a death machine located in the center, filled with Apollo blood. Nearby is a monstrous, humanoid creature draped in gray, rotten flesh, concealing its body as it cries in pain. This creature, referred to as the Conjurer, is the true version of Walter. Elsewhere in the arena, Walter's ghost is seen looking intently at Henry, with bloodlust in his eyes, as Henry comes face to face with Walter, where he also sees Eileen standing idle on a platform. In front of her is the aforementioned death machine, which she is possessed and forced to walk into due to Walter's influence. A young Walter is heard shouting his mom's name as he stands outside room 302. Walter reassures young Walter that he only needs to wait a little longer, until the Twin One Sacraments ritual is completed. Walter tells Henry that he is the last of the Twin One Sacraments, the receiver of wisdom. As the final battle begins, Henry must kill both Walter and the true Walter, before Eileen is killed by the death machine. Henry must use the umbilical cord to make the true Walter vulnerable, to then collect 8 of the spears and punch them into the true Walter. Once done, this makes Walter susceptible to any physical attacks on Henry's behalf. As Henry evens the playing field and battles it out with Walter, he finally kills Walter. As Walter falls on his back defeated, he slowly reaches out his hand, calling his mom one final time before he dies. Subsequently, the true Walter dies, and finally, the young Walter dies as he falls to the ground, disappearing. Afterward, Henry finally escapes from room 302 as he is seen walking away from South Ashfield Heights, exhausted as he limps through the city streets. As he ponders about Eileen, one day later, Henry is seen visiting Eileen at St. Jerome Hospital, giving her flowers. Eileen smiles and scoffs at Henry, jokingly saying that she'll have to find a new place to live. Henry smiles and nods in agreement as they both look at each other happily.